Have you ever just stood and watched a massive thunderstorm roll in and thought, where does all that water actually go? I mean, one minute it's a downpour, and the next you see a stream starting to swell. Well, today we're going to follow that exact journey. We're going to trace the path of the rain from the clouds all the way to the river, and we'll unpack the incredible science that hydrologists use to keep our world from, well, washing away. So let's put ourselves right in the middle of it. Imagine a huge storm just dumped 10 centimeters of rain over your town. Now 10 centimeters, that might not sound like a whole lot, right? But when you spread that over a whole city, we are talking about an enormous, almost unbelievable volume of water. So what happens next? Does it just soak into the ground and disappear? Or does it turn into a torrent rushing down the streets? Answering that one question is absolutely crucial for predicting and hopefully preventing a disaster.
All right, so before we can figure out where the water's going, we first have to get a handle on a much more basic question. Just how much water are we dealing with? So our whole story really begins with that simple act of measuring the storm itself.
See, to really understand a storm, it's not enough to just say, "Yep, it rained." You need its unique signature, its fingerprint. Hydrologists use these amazing tools called recording rain gauges. They capture the storm's rhythm. You know, how hard it rained, for how long, when it was at its worst. This detailed little plot is the very first clue we need to solve the puzzle.
And to get a sense of the sheer scale of the challenge here, let's look at this number, 118 centimeters. That's the average amount of rain that falls in a country like India over an entire year. Spread out over 365 days, you'd think, okay, that seems manageable. But, and this is a huge but, there's a twist. And here it is. More than half of that annual rain, over 50% of it, gets dumped in just 15 incredibly intense, chaotic days. That isn't a gentle spring shower. That is a full-on deluge. It's this incredible concentration of water in such a short time that turns a life-giving resource into a really destructive force. And that, right there, is the central problem that engineers have to try and solve. So you've got this colossal amount of water hitting the ground all at once. Now that water has a big choice to make. Does it soak into the earth, or does it flow over the top? This moment, right here, is the Great Divide.
And the water that flows over the surface, that has a name. It's called runoff. It sounds simple, I know, but this one concept, the split between the water that soaks in, which is called infiltration, and the water that runs off, that is the fork in the road between a nicely watered landscape and a catastrophic flood.
So, how much runoff is a storm actually going to create? That is the million-dollar question for any hydrologist or engineer. And the answer depends almost entirely on one thing. What kind of surface is that rain actually hitting? A spongy forest floor and a concrete city street are going to give you two completely, and I mean completely different answers.
To figure this out, engineers use something called a curve number, or CN for short. The easiest way to think about it is like a sponginess score for the land, on a scale from 0 to 100. So as you can see here, an open forest has a curve number of 60. It's pretty good at soaking up water. But a hard paved road, whoa, it gets a 91. Almost none of that rainwater is going to soak in. It's almost all going to become runoff. And this chart just slams that point home, doesn't it? A forest is basically a giant sponge. A paved road is a water slide. And you have to remember, every single time we build a new parking lot or a new road, we're literally trading a piece of that sponge for another piece of the slide. And that makes our cities and towns far less able to handle the exact same storms that we've been getting for centuries. Okay, so all of that runoff, all that water that couldn't soak into the ground, is now a torrent, and it's all pouring into our rivers. This is the moment of truth for the entire river system. So how do we track what's happening? How can we actually see what the river is feeling in real time?
Well, engineers have this fantastic tool that I like to think of as a fever chart for a river. It plots the river's flow rate over time, and it shows us, moment by moment, exactly how that river is reacting to the stress of all that incoming stormwater. This incredibly powerful chart is called a hydrograph.
And here it is. This is the hydrograph. At its core, it's just a simple graph showing the river's flow rate, or discharge, at one specific spot over a period of time. But don't let its simplicity fool you. This one single line tells the entire story of a flood, from its very first surge all the way to its final retreat. Every hydrograph tells its story in three parts. First, you have the rising limb. That's when the river is swelling up as all that runoff pours in.
Then you hit the peak. That's the moment of maximum flow, the absolute most dangerous point of the flood. And finally, you have the recession limb, which shows the river gradually calming back down, returning to its normal flow as all that extra runoff subsides.
So knowing what's happening at one point on a river is really useful. But what's truly critical, what can actually save lives, is being able to predict what that flood is going to look like miles and miles downstream. This is how you give communities time to prepare. It's basically like looking into the near future.
And this predictive art has a name. It's called flood routing. You can think of it like this. It's the technique of using a snapshot of the flood right here, right now, to paint a very accurate picture of what it's going to become way over there, maybe hours from now, as it continues to travel down the river. It's a real game changer. Now, here's a fascinating thing. A flood wave isn't static. It's not like a solid wall of water. It actually changes shape as it moves. That sharp, dangerous peak tends to flatten out, and the whole wave of water spreads out and gets wider. This natural calming effect is called attenuation, and it happens because the river channel itself sort of acts like a temporary reservoir, absorbing the initial punch of the flood and then releasing the water more gradually downstream.
Okay, so we followed the water from the sky to the ground and into the river. We figured out how to measure it, track it, and even predict its future path. So what's the final piece of the puzzle? It's this. How do we actively step in and tame these powerful forces to keep people and property safe?
Well, we generally fight floods in two main ways. First, you have structural methods. That's when we build physical defenses, things like dams, reservoirs, and levees, or flood walls. Then there are non-structural methods. This is about using smarter policies, like flood forecasting, or creating zoning laws that say, hey, maybe we shouldn't build new houses right here in this dangerous area. Think of it as building a stronger shield while also being smart enough to just step out of the way. You really need both for a complete strategy.
And this all brings us to what might be the single most important rule in this entire field, from K. Subramania's textbook, which was a huge inspiration for this whole explainer. And the message couldn't be clearer. Before you ever design a dam, before you raise a single levee, you first must understand the water. The science always comes first. So everything we've talked about gives us this powerful framework for managing water. But here's the thing. It's a framework that's largely based on historical data, on a climate of the past. So the big question we have to end with is this. As our weather patterns change, as storms become more intense and more unpredictable, how will our science, our ability to predict and manage water, need to evolve right along with it to keep us safe in a much more uncertain future?